Hi everyone, I'm Erika Baffico, interior and industrial designer. I'm very glad to be here, and at first I'd like to thank Martin Lupton and Sharon Stammer for giving me the opportunity to share my presentation I recently did in IALD Enlighten Europe 2024 in London. I'm interior and industrial designer. I'm born in Milan and raised internationally. My passion for light started 6 years ago when I was art director of a lighting brand working with China and designing lamps in pressed glass. Now I have my own studio, Fulcro Design, based in Milan. And today I'm going to talk you about a solution to reconnect with natural rhythms in confined spaces. Its Ora Blu is a lighting system inspired by the rhythms of nature and is a research about the relation between surface and light that I've been undertaking since a bit more than 1 year right now. The term Ora Blu is inspired by a French term, Ora Bleu, which is used to identify the particular condition of indirect skylight immediately after sunset or before dawn, in the moment when the atmosphere reflects a particular tone of dark blue and is not dark yet of the night. So I'd like to start by asking you yourself, do you ever feel uncomfortable after long hours indoor without natural light? And this is what I was questioning myself when I started this research, because contemporary lifestyle has disrupted the rhythm of life, and our sleep and wake cycles, which were naturally linked to the cycle of sun, today, thanks to artificial lighting, we are used to spend many hours indoors, even in spaces without access to natural light, spaces that we can call confined. In fact, we spend 90% of our life indoors, a phenomenon that is certainly accentuated in urban context, in underground floors or floors in densely populated cities, also thanks to building conversion or spaces inside of buildings, just thinking at the waiting room of hospitals, for example. So in all these contexts, we don't have a connection with natural daylight. So from a scientific point of view, natural light is extremely changeable in spectral composition and intensity, as you well know, and from this derives both its charm and also can create well-being. I'd like to illustrate this point by showing you how the evolution has led the human eye to best accommodate the three types of natural daylight according to the direction of origins. So direct sunlight, refracted skylight, and reflected light from the ground. What is interesting is that the circadian efficiency is best recorded between 30 and 90 degrees. That is exactly the same angle of refracted skylight. The circadian efficiency is the circadian rhythms is synchronized in the body thanks to the ganglion cells that are the photoreceptors in the retina and are also working in blind people's eyes. So what are the variables that determines the human biorhythms? Time and duration of exposure, the spatial distribution, and the biological potency, but also the perception of reality reinterpreted by the brain. It has been proven that the correct synchronization between natural light has a positive impact on well-being, with often overlooked non-visible effect due to circadian release of a series of hormones, melatonin and cortisol, higher concentration and reactivity, better quality of sleep, and increased physical and physiological well-being is observed. So, therefore, effect on long-term health. All of this is not happening in confined spaces, in spaces with limited access to natural daylight, in which we tend to spend a lot of time. So my approach is also depending on geographic, because natural light is changeable during the day, but also changeable according to the location, and it shapes our cultural identity. An immediate example is the size of the window in architecture. It's clear that the size of the windows increases with latitudes. And this process also shapes cultural identity. And I'm showing you 3 examples, starting from the Mediterranean context with the use of dynamic light with strong contrast by Carlo Scarpa in the Gipsoteca in Possagno. These contrasts create striking backgrounds to the works on display. Very different approach is by Alvaralto that use the uniform and diffused light specific to Northern Europe to illuminate a library in Viipuri. And third, almost by challenge, Sverfen realizes the Nordic pavilion in Venice, trying to recreate the typical Nordic light in a Mediterranean context. So we see how light shapes cultural and geographical identity. And it's also too important to consider that the brain reinterprets the information received by the eye. So not only always the perception of the space corresponds to real space. I want to talk to you a little bit about perception because I think it's quite important. In this example, James Turrell uses the Ganzfeld effect to create a space where the observer is unable to establish landmarks, transforming confined spaces into boundless lands. 2 other common examples of perception are the use of chiaroscuro to create an illusory perception of three-dimensionality on an image, or the simultaneous contrast in which the color in the middle of the image appears different while actually it's the same color on a different backgrounds. Always with regards to the perception of color, Goethe made a very interesting experiment. You see here a cone illuminated by 2 sources of white light, showing their respective gray shadow. Then he turned on only the left light, applying a green filter on it. Then he turned on the right light, keeping it white, and the result is astonishing. Our brain interprets the right shadow as a complementary color to green, while in reality it is always a gray shadow. The color shadow has no wavelength, so we cannot be measured, and according to scientists they don't exist, but we see them. In everyday life, the use of colored light to induce a perception is widely spread. For example, to induce sleep-wake cycles during long flights. I found central to my analysis regarding the surface and light the phrase of Ettore Sozzas, which says, "From the idea of a surface as a solid tool to mark a limit, to seal a space, we can move on to the idea of a surface as a light deposit, as a tool to expand space, to open it, not to define it, and let the gaze cross its borders. Light-colored lights have no solidity, have an evanescent, uncertain, mobile, and untouchable presence. The design of uncertain spaces, mobile, physically and culturally crossable, perhaps responds to new existential needs." Ora Blu is a site-specific lighting device that stimulates human physiological biorhythm during stays in confined places. concept of the project is interior exteriority, a term coined by Alvar Aalto, which means bringing the exterior environment in the interior space. How? It responds through the reproduction of the sky. So let's see why and how the sky has these particular colors. It is the phenomenon responsible for that is called scattering of Rayleigh and was an intuition by Leonardo da Vinci. It basically works because the air molecules, much smaller than the wavelength of the incident light, absorb lower frequencies, so red and yellow, and disperse the higher ones. And this is why the sky appears blue. Otherwise, it would look black. But then, how can we reproduce the sky that is the result of the enormity of the atmosphere in a limited space, in a confined indoor place? My answer is through the perception of color, which is nothing but light re-emitted. When the light strikes an object, some of the energy is absorbed and some is pushed back. A key element in my research is exactly this relation between the light emitted by the light source and the characteristic of the surface itself. I'm going to explain this topic in a little bit technical way. So let's see a short recap of the tools of color perception. We have the 3 cones on the retina, and what is interesting is that they transmit information regarding only one color each. These informations are reworked in the brain as chromatic sensations by additive synthesis. Let's deep dive now on the magic component of Ora Blu, of my research. So in absolute, the color white re-emits the totality of received light, while a black surface absorbs completely and gray just in part. In reality, instead, white, like that of paper, retains part of the light, and colors are composed of a very specific spectrum of re-emission. So it's all very simple below white light, but certainly you have experienced situations in which the perception of the same object changes under lights with different emission spectra. And to better understand what happens, I have measured the color sample in a Macbeth chamber illuminated with different light sources, and I took measurements with a chromometer by Konica Minolta. And the result is actually highlighting an objective change. And I wanted to understand what was going on. And basically, as we saw, each color has its own absolute re-emission spectrum, which is combined with the specific emission spectrum of the light that hits it. And the result is a relative re-emission spectrum. And in the case of the color on the slide, the color cannot remit the amount of energy A because it's not present in the emission spectrum of the light. And therefore, the colors appear different to us. In this slide, there is this box, and it looks like a uniform color, but if we pay attention, we can see there are 2 different colors, but very similar to each other, slightly different tones. This is an image taken under sunlight, and the same couple of samples, as you can see, they change completely under an incandescent lamp. So this is called metamerism. This is a couple of colors that appear similar under a certain illumination, although their spectral composition is different. And basically, this happens when the barycenters of their absolute free emission spectra are positioned on the same dominant wavelength and synthesize to the eye's equal chromatic sensations. So I've created for my project Ora Blu a finish with enriched spectrum, meaning with peaks of blue, yellow, and red, which make the color very sensitive to lights and reflections. And therefore, the surface will look alive, mutable, and charming. And we have to remember that this effect is now avoided by the industry, which aims to produce colors as stable as possible. So you can see the comparison between the spectrum. The industrial one is always as flat as possible. In this image, and also in this image, you see the comparison between two surfaces painted with colors that looks similar, but are actually composed in a different way. So for Ora Blu, the surface tries to recreate as much as possible the mutability of the natural skylight. And the components of the system are the light source, the re-emission surface, and also an intelligent control. What for? Well, to recreate unpredictable predictability, I would like to call it, which I mean with the continuous change that happens in the natural environment that depends upon a set of variables. Which are those variables? It would be difficult to understand the chronological order of these sunset pictures without knowing the time in which they were taken. And this shows the concept of unpredictable predictability. So this uncertainty of and continuous changing of colors in the sky. The variables that are taken into consideration in Ora Blu are the time of the day, which is obvious in the change of the color of the sky, but also the solar declinations that varies according to the latitude, and with this the way in which the sun rays pass through the atmosphere. Then the angle of solar elevation during the year, with the lowest index during winter, so grazing light and short days, and the highest during the summer, so bright light and long days. And the third variable is the geographic orientation of the room, especially important to determine the chromatism in the sky during rising and setting of the sun. So if Ora Blu is positioned on the west wall or on the east wall, we'll have different colors. And then there could be an implementation with the weather control station to include daily variables such as cloudy sky or rare events. For example, the dust storm that happened in April in Athens, during which the sky was completely orange-yellow, or the northern lights that were seen across Europe last May. These inputs are then elaborated on percentage basis. For example, the cloudy sky of London in January may be virtually gray only for half of the time or less. Last but not least, the programmation of all these inputs takes into account the specific need of each space to elaborate a scenario of with a defined duration to ensure a pleasant and functional visual atmosphere. So, I'd like to illustrate this intelligent control by showing 4 experiments, 4 different locations worldwide, in which we can understand better how it works. Starting from Helsinki, so north in latitude, we see on the left part of the slides the parameters of the location, so the duration of the sunlight across the year, and the winter solstice and summer solstice, and the hours of light. And on the right side, we see the scenarios of Ora Blu. So we see how it changes according to the location and also throughout the year. So the scenarios of the system are reworked in order to be different day by day and reflects what happens outside, but extending the duration of the sunset during winter time. So while outside will be dark, but people will need to keep doing their activities indoor, for example, in an office environment, the duration of the sunset is extended, starting from the moment in which the sun will actually go down in the nature until the end of the lighting scenarios. Going down in latitude, we see here the data for London. The overall duration of the scenario is the same, but in winter, the starting of the virtual sunset is a little bit postponed. And so all the way down to Miami, where the color contrasts are more marked, being closer to the equator. And to conclude, an example in the southern hemisphere, which will reverse the winter scenario with the summer one, in Sydney, for example. So Ora Blu simulates the light diffused from the sky in the form of indirect ambient light and do not imply or exclude the task light. It is positioned on vertical walls, aiming to maximize the benefit given to the non-visible effects of light, as we saw in the beginning. It is extremely easy to install. It consists in a pair of thin horizontal elements separated by an area treated with a metameric finish. Dimensions are not binding, and a single module can vary and be repeated, or also installed adjacent to the ceiling or recessed from wall to wall. So it's extremely versatile and scalable. An additional point of strength is it's very small. The dimensions of the components, we're actually currently working on it, but will protrude from the wall no more than 7 centimeters. And now I'm going to show you a simulation of a typical day, for example, in an office environment. So we see here 3 portions of walls. The first on the left is the west wall. Then in the middle, there is the north wall, and on the right side, the wall on the east. This is what would look like at 8 in the morning. And then at noon, we see these shades of blue and white that could slightly move around and simulate the passage of a cloud. And then at 5 p.m., the sunset is starting to appear on the west wall until increasing slightly, little by little, until getting to more orange colors on the end of the day. And this is a recap of the west wall day. As you can see, the reproduction of the sky is not didascalic, is quite, the sky reproduces through the shades of color. Those shades changes slowly throughout the day, and it gives space to our imagination. And this is the picture of an actual Ora Blu system installed in an office in Milan. As you can see, there are different shades according to the passage of time, which give the diffused ambient light. Until the end of the day. The system is now patent pending, and to envision the potential, I applied to an hypothetical exhibition pavilion that reproduces 6 different environments of a typical office, and each of these environments is located in a different city worldwide. So we can enter the pavilion through a long corridor and observe Ora Blu in an emotional and immersive experience. And then from the right wall, going inside each of the spaces. In this slide, there is an example of an open space, hypothetically located in London, and it's a perfect example of the scalability of the system. As you can see, can be continuous on an 8-meter long wall, or can be installed as a sequence of modules. And entering the pavilion, we can imagine how this space will look like. For example, on a winter day in 3 p.m., this would be the London scenario. And if we cross the room, we cross the door, we go to Helsinki, in which is another time zone, and it's already started the sunset. And then again, we go to the break area, which is hypothetically located in Miami, and will be morning time. And then a phone booth located in New York, still morning. It's interesting to think the application of this system also in ultra-confined spaces like phone booths or lift and elevators. And finally, Sydney. So will be nighttime and we can see the system switched off. Ora Blu is a patent pending system. If you are interested in more information, I will be happy to have a conversation with you. You can contact me by email, and in the website there are a little bit of more information. Observing the sky for me is a unique experience and an endless source of wonder. What if we could have it in our own office? Thank you so much for your attention, and I hope this presentation will be inspiring for you.